Azenathi Dalindyebo that his father's pardon application is being given serious consideration. Earlier this month, Justice Minister Michael Masutha handed the president a recommendation that King Buyelekhaya Dalindyebo be pardoned for his crimes. The king is currently serving a 12-year sentence in prison for arson, assault, kidnapping and defeating the ends of justice. While campaigning in the Eastern Cape yesterday, President Ramaphosa held a brief meeting with the king's son in Mtimka. The president told the media that the matter was being dealt with thoroughly, and Prince Azenathi Dalindyebo urged the AbaThembu nation to be patient.
It is being addressed, and it will be addressed properly, because we are not a reckless government. We are not a government that does things outside the parameters of the law. We will act in accordance with the law, because that's how we are. We are a constitutional state, and we must act in terms of all the laws that govern all these matters, and with due consideration to obviously the compassion that we need to have, because we are a compassionate government as well. So all those factors need to be taken into account before we take any decision.
So let's get more on this story now. Political analyst Ongama Mtimka joins us now live via Skype. Ongama, thank you very much indeed for your time. Firstly, let's get to your reaction with regards to this meeting between the president and the king's son.
Good morning, Blaine, and your viewers. So what I get, the sense that I get from that meeting is that the question is no longer whether or not the king should be released as far as the president is concerned, but how to do so in a way that respects South African law and balances between the justice, the need to ensure that justice is done, but also to accommodate politically the requirements that the AbaThembu nation are making. And I say that because the sense, it came quite strongly. Look at the words that the president had said there: compassion, but also constitutionality, and the request that they be patient. It seems like to me, it's a message of somebody that says, I have good news, but I have to apply myself so that I whatever the decision that I'm going to take is going to pass the rationality test.
So, Ongama, what do you make of criticism coming from some quarters that this possible pardon may be seen as electioneering?
Look, you could never anyway judge this process as anything other than political accommodation. From when it started up until now, it's always been that. The AbaThembu, for example, erroneously had the feeling, and in fact also among the traditional leaders, erroneously had the feeling that the king ought never to have been incarcerated in the first place. And obviously that's not right, because we're a republic and a constitutional state. So the king failed to use the law to prevent his incarceration, and has been serving a duly a sanctioned sentence. What happens beyond it, I think, is an appeal more to compassion. It ought to be an appeal to compassion, and the legitimate political question around the subservience of the traditional political system to the constitutional one, and that, unfortunately, has got to be something that the chieftaincy and the traditional leaders take into account. That after the wars of dispossession and South Africa became a republic, then how the latitude that this traditional system has is only to the extent that it passes the constitutionality tests and those things. So to go back to your question, this was never a question of law as far as I'm concerned. It was always a political issue, with the kings over assuming the political latitude they have, for lack of a better word. But I think what has been confirmed and asserted is the supremacy of the Constitution and the idea that we're a republic that is democratic. But I think that has been, after having served about 4 years, it's enough for the president to be able to entertain the political accommodation question.
Look, Ongama, there is tremendous reverence given to traditional leadership in South Africa, so that factor cannot be ignored. What would a possible pardon mean for the AbaThembu nation? And at the same time, in what light will this put the president in?
From a public interest point of view, and I'm defining public in terms of AbaThembu, I think it would settle questions that have been lingering within that nation about the due leadership of the nation. And I think for some time they were in limbo, attempting to resolve the succession question while the king was incarcerated. It seems to have been settled now that Azenathi is the acting king, but the question still lingers there in some circles. So there's a sense among them that once the king comes back, that question becomes settled, and in fact, he will have time to be able to actually prepare for succession and actually clarify his position on the matter going forward. So that's what it does for them. For the ANC, I don't know. I think the perception that President Ramaphosa would have acceded to their demands would actually help his electioneering cause. Remember, this is a very tightly fought election, and every vote counts here. So I suppose that's where the electioneering argument also comes, that this is pursuant to actually bolstering the ANC's election prospects.
Let's look at the possible repercussions if it goes either way. If the pardon is granted, what sort of precedent do you think it's likely to set for the state?
So if it's not, the extent to which, for me, kings and traditional leaders command the wide following of their supporters has not been tested yet, as far as I'm concerned, to the extent that we don't know, for example, how much power does the king yield over his subjects, to the extent that a command coming from him to say vote in a certain way would be followed. If it does happen, I think the onus would then be on the interested parties to actually challenge it, presumably on basis of rationality and law, should they see that there's enough a vacuum for that. But I take it that the reason why the president doesn't want to do it is rushing in a rash manner, is that he wants to protect himself from a legal point of view, to make sure that all the legal loopholes are closed. But also there's a key issue here which must be strongly communicated to the traditional leaders, that the traditional leaders are subject to the laws of the republic. And the argument which they were advancing throughout this process, for me, it doesn't hold water when they keep giving the impression that kings or traditional leaders should not be convicted of crimes precisely because they are kings.
Yeah. So go on, Ongama, look into your crystal ball. If the pardon is granted, does it happen before or after the elections?
So because there is an electioneering imperative, or let me say political imperative, if it happens after the election, you are likely going to hear the announcement of when it's going to happen before the election. Or you are likely going to hear a committal proposition by government before the election. I don't think they will want it to be open-ended and lingering. And I doubt, though, that he will be released before the election. I think it will only, the best that the AbaThembu nation can hope for is an announcement that the decision has been made with effect from such and such a time, because also the president is wary of being perceived to be electioneering with this issue.
As always, we appreciate your insight, political analyst Ongama Mtimka, live for us there via Skype. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's